Let me ask you something before we play some of the audio from Gerald McCoy on the drive with TKras. Vroom, vroom.
Vroom, vroom.
Do you find him to be a Ring of Honor member? Do you think Gerald McCoy is worthy and deserving of the Bucs Ring of Honor?
I think so. I don't know that he's a lock or that he should be a lock, but I think he had the kind of career that maybe he's not. Maybe he shouldn't be next, right? Maybe there are other guys that belong up there before Gerald, but yeah, I'd say for his generation, like there weren't many players that that he played with that were better than him. As you mentioned earlier, he was on some bad football teams, but he was asked yesterday by Tom about whether or not he believes he's going to go into the Bucs Ring of Honor, and I found his answer very interesting.
No, they haven't, and as much as I would love that, I can't say that I feel like I'll be there. I don't know. What I can say is, regardless of whether I get in there or not, it's a crime to me for anybody to ever question whether Gerald gave us everything he had while he was here.
See, it's interesting. And by the way, at first he talked about the Bucs reaching out to him, which they have not. Gerald, and this is why you and I talked about it earlier. I forget if it was off the air or on the air, because we talk about sports all the time. That's our life. It sounds at times like Gerald wants it a little too much, like he's campaigning a bit. If you hear that last part, calling it a crime.
That's funny.
To say he didn't try. Like, let people decide. We know. True Buccaneers fans know. True football fans know, Gerald, that you gave it all on the field. And just because you were a nice guy as an opponent and a competitor, that you still gave it all you had. From that position to get almost double-digit sacks for a big portion of his career with the Bucs, getting close to double-digit sacks and just being so effective. We know what you did, and we know how good you were. But at times, Pat, it feels like he's stumping, and he's campaigning, and he wants to be loved so much, and he wants all of the Buccaneers fans and Buccaneers Nation to recognize that he actually was great.
I think that's fair. I also think, here's one thing I would say. Remember when Gerald was here for the most of the time he was here, we were not on the air full time. And at the time, I was covering the Bucs. I was there at practice almost every day, and obviously games, which I still am. But I was at One Buck a lot, and I talked to Gerald a lot. And if there's one thing I learned over the years, there's been stuff that he said that I've actually cut out of the audio, so it didn't end up on the radio. In respect to Gerald, but he has not
slip ups though.
There was but in general, whether it's this or something else, like he's always had. He's always had at times not always the best way of putting things. And I think if Gerald had said, it really bothers me a lot that some people don't think I gave my all. We all, like we were saying earlier, it's sad that a lot of Bucs fans don't really like Gerald. And I think if he had said that way, it's kind of the same thing.
Yeah, he's just not good at campaigning.
He's not good. He doesn't always say things the right way. Which I try not to hold against him. But like sometimes he says things where you're like, oh, Gerald, you could really say that in a better way.
You can be honest without saying it like that, where it can rub them the wrong way and make them go, well, you might want this too much. And in a way, you're kind of shaming people for not recognizing that, where it's like, let them decide on their own what you were.
He's an emotional dude. And I've seen that several times. I've mentioned that I think it was against the Giants. There was a game where he kind of like didn't push people violently, but pushed his way through the media, wouldn't speak to us after the game, left, came back the next day when he usually does not speak to the media. Like they speak, certain guys that speak every week, they speak on certain days. So that day after the game was not a day that Gerald usually spoke. We were leaving the locker room, and he stopped all of us and said, hey, can you come back? And then asked, and basically was like, hey, I was too emotional after the game. I didn't want to say something I shouldn't say. And Gerald, we have the kind of relationship, and I say we, like those of us in the media and Gerald, where it wasn't always super friendly. And I thought to myself, I knew if somebody didn't ask, I had to ask, like, this is a really young football team. Aren't you one of the guys that needs to show them how to deal with that kind of stuff after a game? And I thought to myself, I don't know how he's going to react to that question. He actually reacted very well to it. But it wasn't always that way with Gerald, and he didn't always have the best way of putting things.
I also think the prime of his career with the Buccaneers, when he was, his most dominant on defense, the Buccaneers were going through a transitional period with a new quarterback who didn't work out.
Yeah.
A top draft pick on offense that didn't work out. And there were big offensive numbers, but also turned the ball over a lot. So there were countless times that the Buccaneers were placed in a position because of the fault of Jameis Winston where they were in a short field. The defense was playing in a short field. So you got to remember, what the offense and what the team does around him is important. And the way people look at Gerald McCoy is they look at him as a loser because the team couldn't win around him. Well, no, there's a lot of different factors that go in. And in this sport, in football, maybe more so than any other sport, one guy, especially, a guy on defense, he can change a game, but he's not going to turn a season around on his own head.
I personally don't think a lot of Bucs fans don't like McCoy because they lost while he was here. I think it was more about what we talked about earlier, that he was so nice, that he helped people up off the field. But I do want to get into his comments on Baker Mayfield before we hit the break as well, because he was here a couple weeks ago and talked about Baker and Baker sticking around as the Bucs quarterback.
When I was in Tampa a couple weeks ago, he said there's no better feeling than being somewhere where you're wanted. So when you're around somebody that actually wants you there and loves that you're around, you're going to work 10 times harder to make them happy. If Baker Mayfield already operates with a chip on his shoulder, imagine what he's going to do to not disappoint the Buccaneers faithful.